Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I am thankful to have Christine O'Donnell. Christine is the owner of Beacon Gallery, an art gallery in Boston South End, featuring emerging and mid-career artists with a focus on social justice. Christine, thank you for joining me.
Hi, happy to be here.
Awesome. Let's take it way back. Let's start at the beginning. Um, you know, where did you grow up? Maybe talk a little bit about your family situation and what type of kid you were, things of that nature.
Sure. So I grew up not far from here. I'm originally from Newton, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. I'm the eldest of three girls. My family remains very close to this day. We all really enjoy spending time together. Let's see, as a child, I was and continued to be kind of like one of those perfect people pleaser, trying to always help my mother and things like that, and
Yeah.
always worried about making mistakes. And I had, I would say, a taste for adventure that I didn't always indulge in. More to come on that later.
Okay.
And I loved art from a young age, but didn't really know how to express that. But clearly I've managed to do that now. And I loved to read. From a very young age, I was obsessed with the Little House on the Prairie series. I must have read that over and over again, fantasized about, I don't know, living a frontier life.
What got you into art? Were you yourself involved in like painting and drawing?
So I'm a product of the Newton Public Schools, and I had my art classes there. And pretty much everything I know and the very foundation of my education was from the public school system. I speak fluent French and love the arts. I wouldn't say I'm a great artist or anything like that, but my appreciation from the arts probably comes from my background there. And yeah, it started there, but it also started with this coffee table book that my parents had that was about Monet. And I would go and sit in the living room and look through that book over and over again. I wouldn't really read anything from it, but I would just look at Monet's paintings over and over again. And my parents would take us to museums, particularly the MFA, maybe every once in a while, every few years or so. So I probably saw a few of them in person, but really, I think my appreciation for the fine arts started with that book. And it was one of the books that when my parents were moving out of the family home that I requested that I have, because it was really meaningful to me, much more so beyond a regular art book would be.
Yeah. And so I guess you also developed a love for foreign languages. Was that something that came about in high school, or was it even at a younger age?
That's a really good question. When did I start loving foreign languages? Because I think I always loved them. I really struggled with French in high school academically. Even though I loved it, I somehow ended up in one of these classes that was like too hard for me, or too easy for me one year, too hard for me the next. And so I found it very stressful, I think, like a lot of people do.
Yeah.
But I'm here to tell you that despite that fact, I managed to get over it and managed to get through my stress and became fluent in French, mostly because I lived here for years. And sorry if someone who wanted to come and that bell, but yeah, I think they're gonna just have to wait, unfortunately. And I have learned French and then Spanish. I'm learning a bit of sign language now as well. I have a child who is unilaterally deaf, so deaf on one side.
Yeah.
And my love of languages kind of has married well with that as also.
Yeah. Was that something you in high school you were like, it probably was a requirement to take a foreign language, but did you know it in high school that you would, end up?
No, so I ended up studying abroad in college,
Okay.
and I went to Strasbourg, France. I also met my husband in French class at Holy Cross, and so I think between the two of those things, I really those both kind of made me encouraged me to continue with my love of French, probably. So, spent a year living with a host family in France, and I love the travel aspect. I'd always really enjoyed seeing new cities, seeing new places. I always wanted to visit the art galleries first as
Yeah.
well. Should have been a sign,
Yeah.
also, of what I wanted to do. Um, in the end, I've had a couple different careers, which I could talk to you about. And the languages, though, I think I really enjoy expressing myself. I love to write also. So the reading, the writing, um, the linguistics in general has always fascinated me. I really enjoyed French poetry, which might seem a bit cliche, but there's just something about the way the words flow together has always just really moved me.
Gotcha. I'm gonna take it back a little bit more. So I guess um, let's take it a little bit back to high school and your decision to go to Holy Cross. What were some of the factors involved in there? At that time, did you know you were, a humanities person and things of that nature?
I knew that I wanted to study something in the humanities, that's for sure. Liberal arts was where I was headed. I started actually as a sociology and anthropology major. As a young child, I desperately wanted to be an archaeologist. That was like my first job that I really wanted. So there's always been something about studying people, studying artifacts, being around objects made by others. I think that's always really spoken to me. And for Holy Cross, my father went there actually. So he was class of 1973,
Yeah.
and he would bring us there a lot when we were kids. And while I definitely looked at other colleges, none of them really measured up in my mind to this kind of platonic ideal of what a college was supposed to be, which was Holy Cross that I had seen since I was a kid. He would bring us to football games and then would give us an M&M every time the team had a touchdown or a first down or something
Yeah.
like that. And it was great fun for
Yeah.
me and my two sisters. And so when it came to actually applying, I applied their early decision and got in and went and never looked back.
Gotcha. So I know you talked a little bit about going abroad, but before that, at what point did you commit to the French major, and maybe what were some of the factors into uh, just deciding to go for that?
I think that I knew at a certain point that sociology, anthropology wasn't quite what I had expected. Although I have to say that the class I took with Susan Rogers, I believe my freshman year, was and remains one of the most enlightening classes that I probably took at Holy Cross, and one that I take away the most from. We learned a lot about Indonesia in the class, which was a place I really knew nothing about as an 18-year-old. And going and living in Singapore, which is adjacent to Indonesia, as an adult, I really valued having a bit of that information from way back in a platform on which I could base some adult knowledge. Um, but nonetheless, it wasn't firing me up, I think, the way I wanted a major to. And I'd also had in my mind a desire to be a teacher. And I think that I decided somewhere in my freshman year, taking these French classes, that I wanted to be maybe a French teacher.
Yeah.
And so I switched over to French. Another great passion of mine is history. So that was another thing I maybe considered. But I decided that based on my love of languages, I was going to go and be a French teacher. So I switched my major to French, took a lot of French classes, and then eventually went to Tufts University and got my master's in arts and teaching
Gotcha.
in French.
Talk a little bit more about your abroad experience. How was that, and eventually, later on in your life, you would live abroad. But how formative was that semester? Um,
So actually, it was an entire year.
Oh,
Back then,
sorry, entire year. I apologize.
no, no. I
Yeah,
mean, most people I think assume that it's just a semester, but Holy Cross actually made you go for an entire year. You
gotcha.
had to live with a host family. I lived with this very bohemian family. It was Geneviève Sam Amavi and her daughter Fenella and their dog Uzbek. And Uzbek had been abused and would bark at everyone. And he had to be muzzled the first time I met him because he was going to attack me or something. But he and I became great friends, as I did with Geneviève and Fenella as well. Geneviève actually ran an art gallery in Strasbourg, which
Wow.
was great fun to hear about. She'd come back and tell me all about the vernissage, which is the French word for openings.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that actually led me anywhere in terms of wanting to open an art gallery, but it was certainly funny to think back on now.
Yeah.
Um, and that year, though, so my then boyfriend, now husband, and I both lived with separate host families. He was with the Picard host family across um, a little park from me, and we would plan all these trips traveling around, on a wing and a prayer with no money, and we went to all these crazy places and had great fun and went to places like Greece for the weekend or Portugal for 5 days, and then took like a train and a boat and a bus and a taxi to get from Portugal, somewhere in the south of Portugal, to Sevilla, Spain, and only ate peanut butter sandwiches because we had no money to go and eat a cafe or
Yeah.
anything, and then when we came back, we moved in together after graduation, after finishing our senior year, started jobs, started a master's degree,
Yeah.
and then finished it and kind of said, wow, is this it? Are we just going to stay here forever? Or should we see what's possible in terms of maybe having another experience abroad where we work and actually have some money
Yeah.
and can travel a little bit more?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can see on the screen, my last name being O'Donnell, my husband is actually of Irish origin. And so he was able to reclaim his Irish citizenship. And thus we got married and moved over as Irish citizens,
Wow.
or being married to an Irish citizen.
Yeah.
And so we had the ability to work in Europe and live in
That's,
Europe.
that's cool. Um, what's the best part about traveling? Why do you have such a desire? I think that a lot of people fear, the unknown and things of that nature, and being in a society that you're not necessarily in day to day. What's the difference in your mindset on that stuff?
Oh, um, I think from probably some of the things I said in terms of what I'm interested in, like sociology and anthropology, and writing, and just love of languages, I've always wanted to immerse myself in other cultures and learn. Great learner. I'm always kind of going back to school and doing things. I'm going to start a master's in art history in the fall, just
Awesome.
because
Yeah.
why not? I
Yeah.
don't know. I just love this stuff. And so there's really nothing like going to another country to really understand it. And so I've always loved that. I mean, and that even goes for another city, even in the US. And getting to kind of see the people and just experience the food. I also am kind of a hobbyist architectural photographer. And so it was a chance to photograph a lot. I tend to get really bogged down, though, in terms of not enjoying a place when I'm photographing it, because all I can do is photograph it. So I usually actually don't take cameras around with me because I found I get too wrapped up and not really enjoying myself. Just focus on other things instead. I want to focus on being there and being present. And so those are some of the reasons that I really love traveling. It's just the experience of walking around a city.
Yeah. For someone out there that might be watching this who's maybe a little averse to traveling or seeing different places, what would you say about maybe some of the exciting parts of exploring a new city, and why they may even want to go to a different country? What are
Mm.
how does that how has travel, maybe it's brought new perspectives to you, or what have been some of the I guess the lessons, if there are any, from all of the travel that you've done?
I would say that travel is very eye-opening, and the opportunity of living abroad definitely gives you the chance to step back from American culture. And that is true even for brief trips also. It's a chance to see how other people live and that there are other ways other than the American way. I
Yeah.
think that when you're steeped in American culture, you don't realize you're kind of like a fish in water. It's like you don't realize that you're in the water until you kind of step outside the fishbowl and can kind of look at it from the outside. And in traveling elsewhere is a chance to see how other people live, and that we do have a real culture here in America that's very identifiable to others outside of our culture. I think a lot of people find themselves afraid to travel because that it's dangerous. I remember people, friends of friends, we were on the beach saying, "You're so brave to have children when you lived in Asia," not realizing that Hong Kong and Singapore are some of the safest places in the world. I mean, we can talk about the civil unrest that's happening, but still Hong Kong, incredibly safe. Singapore, probably one of the safest places in the world. People think of America as incredibly dangerous. It has a very dangerous reputation because people think that everyone is carrying a gun and that people are shot all the time.
Yeah.
And so it really is a chance to understand that from the outside, things look different. And I think that is an incredibly enriching experience for anyone.
That's really cool. So you get the experience of, a non-American culture, and then you also get to reflect on how America is viewed,
Oh, yeah.
from the outside. That's pretty interesting. Um, so then you did a master's in education at Tufts? Is that okay? And then you started out as a French and Spanish teacher at Belmont High. Um,
Did that for 1 year. My students were barely older than barely younger than I was. I was about like 22 or 23.
yeah,
Some of them were 17 or 18.
yeah. And how was that?
Um, and the first year teaching is always incredibly challenging. I do need to say this, and this is an amazing story in a way, that when I was looking for my teaching job, you send out your resume everywhere. No one really wants to hire someone with no experience, let's be honest. The person who was the head of the foreign language departments at Belmont High School was my old homeroom teacher from Newton South. So she had been a Spanish teacher, Janice Darius, who's now the assistant superintendent in Belmont Public Schools. And she knew me. And so she was willing to give me a chance. And I will be eternally grateful to that woman for doing that. And it was just such an amazing set of circumstances, coincidence, to be given that opportunity. It did feel a bit like divine intervention. And I spent a year there, and my husband and I got married after that year, and we moved to France, and she was incredibly gracious, and having had me there for a year teaching Spanish 1, which I did a pretty mediocre job teaching, and I think I'm still being generous with myself. And French 3, which is kind of like the lead up to AP. And to think now that those students are really like well into their adulthood is crazy to me.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you moved to France after that year. What made you, ultimately decide to take that leap of faith? And
Oh yeah, it definitely was a leap of faith. My husband and I, over our, so we would have been just still fiancés at this point. My April vacation, we went to France, and my husband had lined up job interviews. He works in finance, and so he's working at a firm here in the US. He'd lined up job interviews with a couple of banks and went on maybe like 7 different job interviews. But nothing really came of it. I mean, his French is good enough, but they're all saying like, well, let us know when you've moved here, essentially. Like, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to give you a job until you've moved here.
yeah,
So at a certain point, we literally had to just say, we are leaving. We are going to get married.
Yeah.
I'm not coming back to my job in the fall. My husband had to quit his job, buy plane ticket, and and take that leap of faith. And I want to say it was sometime maybe in like May or June. And I believe that after that, maybe 2 weeks later, he got an actual job offer.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a contract that you would sign, but it was like, we have something we want you to try out when you get here. Like, here's a job that we want you to do, and we think you can do it well. And that was working on the request for proposal team at BNP Paribas, which is one of the largest banks in France. They also sponsor the French Open, if anyone follows tennis.
Yep.
And he worked for them for the entire 6 years we lived in Paris, and then 3 years in Hong Kong.
Wow.
So that really worked out in lots of different positions.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll tell you more about what I did, which was not quite as
how hard of a decision. I mean, you're like 23, 24. You know, I'm sure your parents, his parents may have had some questions. I'm sure your friends even were like, what are you doing?
We got married July 10th, 2004, and moved over like August 15th, August 20th, to after like our honeymoon and a few weeks kicking around the Northeast. Yeah, we like pretty much took all our wedding presents and put them in a closet and didn't look at them for 13 years.
Wow.
I mean, we had opened them and everything, thank you notes, but that was it. There were a lot of people, I think, were wondering what we were doing, but I think they also realized that at such a young age, with no children and no real ties, we didn't have a house or anything like that. It's like, what's the worst that could happen? You kind of come back with your tail between your legs. And I think that's honestly a philosophy that I have held on to through the years in a way. Even with opening the gallery, it's like, the worst thing that could happen is that I fail. And failure is never fun, but if you can kind of assume upon yourself and be okay with like what the worst scenario is going to be, then it gives you the freedom to try.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, I'm not going to die if this business goes under. I'm not going to die if I can't make it in France, if the jobs don't come through.
Yeah.
And so that gave us the freedom to kind of go over there and give it a go. It was incredibly hard though.
Yeah. How hard is moving? I mean, obviously you spent a year in France, but I mean,
living with a family is completely different than making a life there. We barely could get a bank account. So you have this like vicious cycle. So the French bureaucracy is like out of this world. Love the French, love the language, love the country, love the food, amazing, everything, great. But the bureaucracy, my God, my husband was working for the bank, and like literally we could not get a bank account. And we finally managed to get a bank account only because we got a letter from his boss. And he worked at like number 5 and the bank was at number 51. And, we had to bring the letter down to number 51. And they said, the only reason that we're letting you in is because you're working down the street.
Wow.
Yeah. And we still have the bank account. We can't close it because you have to go.
That's funny. So talk about what you were doing in France.
I spent the first 6 months convinced that I somehow was going to make French friends for myself, which is virtually impossible, just like it is anywhere else if you don't have kids or a job or anything to do. So I spent 6 months essentially being very lonely. Yeah. And so I have a ton of empathy for any expats out there. And I'm always delighted to talk to people when they come into the gallery who've just moved from anywhere, because I want to orient them and help them, and probably come across as way too aggressive as a result. Whatever. Yeah. And then I joined an American Women's Association, made some connections there, and ended up getting a job working in a firm there through one of those connections. Where it started out, it was like they had hired me to do some English translations, but then the next thing I knew, and so this is completely outside of education, let's just say, because I kind of said Coles to Newcastle, I can't work in teaching because I only want to teach French. I don't want to teach English. So I got to find something else to do. And I ended up working in at this company called Kiwi, which was like a mobile phone startup company that had been bought by American Greetings, which is the card company in the US.
Yeah.
And they were doing like personalization of your mobile phone. And this was back when it was like the flip phones and everything like that. And I ended up in like the sales and marketing roles. And I would say I learned a lot from it, and made some friends that I still have, but it was not for me. Desk jobs, I learned through that job, and then through the subsequent one, which was working at another kind of larger marketing firm. Also, just it wasn't my cup of tea. Having a boss, having people tell me what to do. I also realized that I really like being my own boss, and
Yeah.
getting to decide what my day looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I ended up deciding to go back to teaching after a couple of years, and worked at an international school as an upper elementary English teacher. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Um, I guess, was there ever a point at which you and your husband were thinking like, oh man, like I this may have been a mistake. I want to go back, or I mean,
No, I don't think there was. I mean, we talked about moving back. Originally, we were going to go for 2 years, right? So after 2 years, though, we felt like we wanted to stay a little bit longer. So then we're like, we'll stay for 4 years. But then when we got to 4 years, it was 2008. And there were no jobs back in the US.
Yeah.
It was the financial crisis. And so my husband had a job, and it was steady, and he was okay. And so really all we could do was stay. It didn't feel like there were a ton of different options. And in a way, it's his job that has really led us from place to place. Even this move back to Boston was for his job.
Yeah.
And so we never really felt like we had made any missteps in terms of like, oh, we shouldn't have done this or that. Although the move to Singapore was incredibly precipitous, and I can tell you more about that as we get closer to that time.
Yeah. What was I guess what's the hardest part about living abroad? I mean, I assume most of your friends were in the US. I'm not sure how much you saw them, things of
I
that
think what's
nature.
hard is that it's not even like I would say being apart from family,
Family.
because the thing is that we really only made our friends in college, and then had a few friends from our first couple of years back, but then we moved abroad, and we made our friends in France, and then we had to leave those friends.
Yeah.
And then we made our friends in Hong Kong, and we had to leave those friends. And we made our friends in Singapore, and some of our friends from Hong Kong ended up in Singapore at the same time as us, because that's what people just go back and forth between those two cities constantly. I think the leaving behind of friends in any country is maybe one of the hardest things. And then leaving your family back in the US.
Yeah.
My husband's family found it incredibly difficult to have us abroad because they weren't as seasoned travelers as my parents were. But for both families, it was very hard. Video chat made things easier, but there's nothing like seeing people in person.
Yeah. In your time there, was there something about the, French society that you wish American society would adopt?
Ooh, I mean, I wouldn't complain about all the vacation. There was the French had the RTT, which is the 35-hour work week, which means that if you work more than 35 hours for people in certain roles, like my husband, instead of forcing you to only work 35 hours, what they do is they just add a certain amount of extra time to your vacation time. So my husband was coming away with like 9 weeks of vacation every year, which is totally absurd.
Yeah.
And so we definitely got to travel a lot. I mean, there are a lot of negative parts of having that much vacation. Let's be clear. So I say all of this a bit tongue in cheek, but it was fantastic to have that much vacation. The French do have a certain joie de vivre, as we say. Like the food is amazing, the wine is fantastic. French meals were great, and it's a less consumeristic culture, and that was something that I really did appreciate living there.
Yeah, yeah. So you spent about 3 years there, and then you moved to Hong Kong?
Yeah, we were there for just about 4 years. So we were there from or no, I'm sorry, just about 6 years. We were there from 2004 until 2010. And then in March 2010, it took about 2 years for BNP Paribas to kind of like get all the wheels in motion. This is what happens at like old school French banks, to expatriate us to Hong Kong. And so we became like traditional expats in Hong Kong and moved there in March of 2010. And we were there for about 4 years. And that was fantastic. The chance to travel in Asia was amazing.
Yeah.
Loved that. Went to Vietnam, we'd been to Cambodia previously, because again, the French influence, BNP had done some like big trip there. And so I went and met my husband in Vietnam and Cambodia trip previously. Went to India and Nepal over Christmas one time, and Thailand and Singapore and Bali. And then we had our first child on 11/11/11, which
Wow.
was a really fun date for him to have as a birthday. I get a lot of comments. And made a really great group of friends. We had like this one group of friends. We could do lots of fun things together, which was really great. So it remains my favorite place of all the places that we lived.
What was the incentive or was to move to Hong Kong? Why'd you guys want to do that?
So BNP
Yeah.
kind of created a role for my husband there. They had a job that they wanted him to do. And we liked the idea of having another travel experience and another chapter abroad that would kind of broaden our horizons beyond France. And it was just, I think that like desire to see a different part of the world too. We had seen at a certain point, we stopped traveling in Europe. I think we called it being churched out or being cathedral and castled out or something.
Yeah.
Felt like we'd seen everything. So we stopped going really close by and went to places further away like Dubai and Turkey. And at one point we went to Morocco as well. Which were fantastic, but we realized that we did want to see a little bit more of the world. And so this was going to give us kind of a jumping off point for that too.
Yeah. And so in Hong Kong, you were an English teacher as well?
I taught English at the French International School's preschool. And so I had the cutest, teeny tiniest little students who were about 2.5 to about 4 and maybe 5. And I did that full time the first year, and then once I had my eldest son, about half-time. And then I started a second master's degree in education administration and management, but then we ended up leaving after one semester to move to Singapore.
Gotcha.
So
How was raising your kids in Hong Kong?
very different from the US. We didn't have a car, so the whole car seat conundrum becomes very different when you're taking buses and taxis everywhere. We lived in an apartment in a high rise. The city of Hong Kong is like this. It's like on an incredibly steep hill. At least this is on the island, Victoria Island. There are other parts that are in the New Territories that aren't so much like that. We had a nanny, so that obviously is very different than living here. And that partially allowed me to continue working as well. It's hard and different when you're so far away from your family as well. So you can't have any other help. So in a way you kind of need someone because you're stuck in this situation where there's really no one you know well enough to help you. Your friends in a way become your family because you have to band together in case someone really needs something.
Yeah.
And it was good though. I mean, the air pollution was always a concern, but it was fun. It was a positive experience all around.
Yeah. Was there any part of Hong Kong society you think that America should adopt, or was there something that you really liked about that?
Um,
Yeah.
the Cover class is quite the gourmand, but I mean, dim sum, yum cha is amazing. Make sure to have it for breakfast or lunch, never dinner.
Yeah.
So I really did love that. This is more of like an Aussie or like Western type of thing that that happens in Hong Kong, but junk boat culture is also really fun, where people can band together and rent a boat and just spend the entire day on it, swimming around or driving around the islands and swimming around and just eating and drinking. That's a really fun activity for friends. And the city is really easy to get around because it's on this really big hill. For some reason, that just makes it very accessible, it seems, unless you're like wearing heels or something, I guess.
Yeah.
But taxis are very easy to come by, and you can walk to a lot of different places. Yes, it's like 90 degrees and 100% humidity, but still. And you have Lan Kwai Fong, which is really fun. It's like this entire block that's just bars, and there's no kind of open container laws, so you can just stand in the street and have a beer and chat with your friends. So I really enjoyed kind of like that party atmosphere, but then there is this whole more quiet side and hiking. There's beautiful hikes as well, and the nature is really amazing also. So Hong Kong really does have a lot to offer. I think people see it often as like just a stopover on their way somewhere else, but it's really a destination on its own.
At this time, were you like everywhere you were you going to art galleries? Like,
Honestly, no. I mean, once we had our son, you
yeah,
really can't.
yeah,
Like we went to no, we went to Taipei, and yeah, we did what we could. We mostly were wandering around the city and enjoying the fact that it was flat, so we could walk,
yeah,
and we had great fruits and vegetables there, so enjoyed that.
yeah.
And brought him to playgrounds. And what was hilarious there is you had to wait in line. I mean, it's gonna be like that here now, I guess, but like wait in line to use the swings. And so that's one of the things I remember from Taipei. You have to queue up to use the swings. They're very orderly.
Do you think there's any benefit to raising a kid abroad? Is there stuff that your children have experienced that maybe have made them, you know, better human? I don't know, or just
I don't think my children will have any real benefit to their time abroad because they were brought back at such young ages.
okay,
I think that there's definite benefits to children who spend their entire lives abroad or like their entire childhoods abroad, but there's also drawbacks.
yeah,
So I was someone who got to go through one school system my entire life, and I had one set of people, for better or for worse, right, who kind of knew who I was, could never reinvent myself, but I also didn't have to reintroduce myself every year and didn't really have to make new friends. Whereas the expat life means that you're constantly kind of coming and going, and your friends you're having to make new friends, and you know, you may have this great friend and then you learn that they're moving, and they're moving to Russia, or they're moving to Korea, or they're moving back to the UK or the US. It's just a treadmill of people. And you know, I have friends now all over the world, which is amazing, but it's really hard to keep in touch with all those people.
yeah,
I think that you can learn a lot in terms of other cultures, other languages. It definitely broadens your horizons for children. And the schools are some of the best schools in the world. I mean, like the schools in Hong Kong and Singapore are fantastic, but that's not to say you can't get a good education elsewhere either.
yeah, yeah. And then, so then after Hong Kong, you moved to Singapore?
Yes. So I was, let's see, I want to say 30 weeks pregnant with Ryan, my second son,
Yeah.
when my husband was offered a job in the Singapore office. And our options were going to be to like wait until we had two children, one of whom was going to be like 6 months old, and wait 6 months to move, which was really going to be torture,
Yeah.
or orchestrate a move in about 5 weeks. So we orchestrated a move in about 5 weeks, because you can't fly after you're 35 weeks pregnant.
Oh, okay.
And we managed to make that happen, and it was absolute insanity. And we moved around, we moved like February 15th, like the day after Valentine's Day. Because I remember our Valentine's Day meal being like, you know, noodles out of styrofoam cups or something in this little tiny hotel room, and being like, Happy Valentine's Day. And we moved, and then I went into labor 2 weeks early, or 3 weeks early actually.
Yeah,
So I had him like 2 weeks after we arrived.
Yeah.
And then before we had even moved into our apartment, before
Oh,
our stuff was even there.
yeah.
So Singapore was like one drama after another. So,
Is that scary, giving birth in a foreign country?
I mean, I'd already done it once.
Yeah. True.
So,
True.
no. I mean, I had C-sections with both my children, so we're not getting into details, but Ben was breech, and so he had to be one, and so then Ryan did the same thing. That was fine. I don't think you would necessarily know about this from anything I've said before, but Ryan, the younger one, had bacterial meningitis when he was 9 months old, and had to be in a medically induced coma over Christmas, 2014, and almost died. I mean, like, he was in sepsis. And so when I look back over like his birth versus like that time in the hospital, his birth time is not particularly traumatic.
Yeah.
That's the 3 weeks we spent at the children's hospital or the week that we thought we may have lost him, was the time that was traumatic. But I will say that it was also a time where people will say, you're so unlucky that happened. And people knew who I was. Like, there's not that many like white people in Singapore who end up at that hospital, and like kids are dying and things like that. Like, people are like, oh, that's you?
Yeah.
Yep. But like, I came out of that, people say, you're so unlucky. And I say, well, no, I feel so incredibly lucky because my child survived this incredibly serious illness. And I feel like we learned from that. I mean, I learned to kind of have to sit with an unknowing that was incredibly, incredibly difficult. I mean, to just wait in this space was very hard, but it taught me something.
What did it teach you?
Well, I think that I'm not particularly patient, and I just want results all the time.
Yeah.
Now. And I think that all of us, I mean, it's similar. I've compared it, for people who know me, to what we're going through with the coronavirus, where people are kind of like, I want to know when this is over,
Yeah.
And it's like, right, but you can't.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know when this is going to be over, and you don't know what the results are going to be. And my experience with my son was very similar, in that I kept waiting every day to kind of like get the answer, right? And it's like, well, this blood test, this blood test. And I'm getting an echo. Do you hear it?
I don't, but maybe there is one. I'm fine on my end.
No, I don't know what's happening. Oh no, I think it's gone now. It was so strange. In any case, I really kept looking for some sort of like proof that he was going to be okay. And, I had to sit with the fact that I couldn't get that for weeks virtually, or for like, days and days and days and days. And you kind of learn, I think, a type of patience that I never had before. And it's given me the ability to sit with uncomfortable feelings in a way that I had never had before that moment.
Yeah. So in Singapore, how long were you guys there?
We were there a little bit over 2 years, and I laugh because we signed a 2-year lease on our apartment, and then we decided we're going to move and go to a different apartment. Signed another 2-year lease. I was going to start a doctoral program in education. And then my kids were all signed up for school and everything like that. And then about 6 weeks after we moved, surprise, surprise, this role that had been filled for about 10 years that my husband had his eye on back in Boston opened up. And let's say the person resigned on the Wednesday, they called my husband on the Thursday and offered it to him and said, give us your answer on Monday. And we couldn't turn it down. Because the problem is...
How long were you guys there in Singapore?
So we were there for like 2 years and 4 months or something.
Oh, okay.
So we had 2 months to kind of move back.
Yeah.
But to wrap everything up, to kind of, for me to tell the university that I actually wasn't going to do my PhD with them, for us to tell the schools that the kids weren't going to come, for us to sell the car that we had just bought. And if you know anything about the cars in Singapore, cars that are incredibly cheap here. I think we bought a 2008 Subaru Forester for like $48,000 or something, Sing dollars.
Yeah.
I want to say we sold it for like, a few months later for like $46,000 or something
Okay.
like that. Because it's the certificate of entitlement. So you need to have the COE it's only good for 10 years and it costs like $100,000 or something like that. So yeah, it is crazy, the cost of cars there.
Yeah. So then you come back to Boston at that point.
Yeah.
So that's
That was in
we're talking about like 2013,
2016. So
2016. Cool.
yeah, so
Um,
2016, and it took us I took about a year to get the kids settled and then I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And I
and
remember I was on a walk being like, what do I want to do? Do I really want to like do the applications again? I had to take like the GREs again. My first scores for the GREs were too old before, so I had to take the GREs again and everything like that. I mean, obviously I wouldn't have had to do that again, but I had to put together another like dissertation proposal, and really wasn't sure if I wanted to be like an adjunct professor. I saw my future once I had done the whole rigmarole to get into a doctoral program, and I said I kind of want to do something that would be more fun.
yeah,
And it was like a light bulb moment, and I was like, I think I want to open an art gallery. I've always wanted to curate. It had been this kind of unvoiced desire inside of me since I was a kid. And I had that thought in July of 2017, and the gallery was open in November of that same year.
wow. So let's digest that. I mean, talk about, um, did you have entrepreneurial friends, or I mean, how hard was that process of starting a gallery? What are the steps to
Goodness.
starting a gallery?
I mean, I came up with the name and got the URL and kind of like the business, registered the business all around the same time. And then once you have that, I started looking for spaces. And I'm over on Harrison Ave in the South End, where there are a lot of other art galleries. I think that that's one of the important things, is that with a lot of other businesses, you kind of want to be away from your competition. Like if you're going to open an ice cream shop, you don't want to be like next door to another ice cream shop. But with art galleries, there's a benefit to all being next to each other, because people love to kind of like go in and out and see all the different ones when they shop.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was this amazing space available. And so I only looked at a couple spaces, signed a lease on it, did a fit out. Luckily I had a contractor that had been working on our house. And so honestly, like he was still working, we had moved not that long before. And so I said, you need to stop working on my house for a few months. Come and work at the gallery. And so he did things like this wing wall that you see behind me. I would say that, I mean, like I did a business plan. I used SBA.gov, has a lot of resources on it, and which I would highly recommend people look into. SCORE as well. I did not know about SCORE back then. That's a service corps of retired executives, has a lot of info as well. But so there's things on there that can really help you figure out, like, is your business viable? What do you need to do to be able to like make the numbers to make this work? So I did those things, but I just had like an inherent idea of what I wanted to do. There are some books on like how to run an art gallery out there also, which I devoured from front page to back page. And then I also am a very instinctual person. And so that's where I also went, was just, what did I feel in my heart was going to work for me? And that's often why I get into the social justice side of things, is because that's really what feeds my spirit. And what I love is, as I kind of remain an educator, I would say, I've just moved out of the linguistic side and now want to talk to people about so much of what's happening in the world and issues that are close to my heart, and use art that people are making to talk about that.
Yeah. So how did you, so in 4 months you got like, a bunch of artists, or how did you?
Yeah. I mean, I knew a few artists. I think
Okay.
that in teaching and just through my own interests, like I knew a few people that I wanted to involve. And then there are enough people in this area who are involved with artist associations that I just did some research and went and saw their work and did some studio visits and was able to put together a first show for November 1st.
Wow.
Did that. And then, yeah, my second show was all about refugees, and I was off and running.
Cool, cool. So I guess what makes Beacon Gallery unique? Why should people come and visit? You know,
I think it is our focus on social justice. I like to think that, as well as our accessibility. I think that so much of the art world is based on kind of creating something that feels very inaccessible and very just that it's only for a very small portion of society, whereas I try to create an environment that feels very welcome, very open, and where you should never feel intimidated. And so whatever I have up on the walls, because I think as you can see behind me, this work is not social justice work. This is a photography show, because I do need to pay the bills too. So we kind of go back and forth between what we show. We try to be pragmatic and practical also. That the visit here should be enjoyable, no matter what, no matter who you are or what you're bringing here. And that the social justice work thus is kind of both bringing people in as visitors, that everyone is welcome. The work on the walls, sometimes we'll talk about social justice. And then also in working with emerging artists, it's trying to find a diverse mix of artists, people who haven't had opportunities before, people who don't necessarily know how to approach a gallery. And so I'm constantly trying to figure out how to kind of like find new, different people also.
Yeah. What were some of the hard parts in the early years? Back in 2017, 2018.
I think that I now have an art installer I work with. I think installing shows on your own, it can be quite hard. So art installations definitely become easier, just on a very practical level. I think that, the rhythm of it, I think I often was being a bit too ambitious. I'm often guilty of that in all aspects of my life, I would say.
Yeah.
And that is something I've tried to be not quite so punishing. So I'll give myself, instead of doing a show every month, it's now some shows are a month, some shows are a month and a half, maybe some over the summer are 2 months long, and I'm a bit more relaxed. I also have learned how to use Photoshop better and know how to use all the tools of the trade to my advantage. And so it's not quite as hard as it was at the beginning, when, it was just learning and it would take me forever to do anything, it felt like.
Yeah. Was it hard to, kind of create brand value of, what Beacon Gallery is, and to get visitors to come and see, the artists and the exhibitions?
I think that creating brand value is something that's always ongoing, because if you don't maintain it, then it loses value. It's one of those things that you're constantly trying to support. And yes, trying to get people to know who you are is an ongoing issue, because I think people still come in and say, "Oh, I've never seen you before. How long have you been here?" And I'm just saying, in virtually 3 years, Yeah. And I think that, yes, in the beginning it's tough. First Fridays definitely helped a lot. So I put out good food, good drinks, all that on First Fridays, and that brings a lot of people in, and you like to think that they're gonna remember who you are and come back and visit. Trying to get press, you like to think that helps a little bit. We're now trying to, I would say that like around Boston, we're well known enough, maybe. I mean, we'll see based on what the people who listen to this think. But it's kind of breaking out of that. And so we've shown now at Spring Break in New York and at Aqua down during Art Week in Miami. And so it's like now trying to bring it to a higher level, right? Trying to get known
Yeah.
by people outside this
New
small
England.
microcosm in the
Yeah.
Northeast. Is that possible? And that's what I really love. Wouldn't
What's
everyone,
the
right?
what
I said,
what did you
wouldn't
say?
everyone?
Yes, yes. What's the best part? What brings you the most joy? What keeps you doing it every day?
Oh, good question. I really still like the curatorial side, deciding which shows to put up and then actually physically putting the art on the walls or deciding where it's going to go. Putting the nails in, no. But like actually deciding like what's going to go where. I get like goosebumps doing that because I feel like I am telling a story with images. And I find that so rewarding. The other thing is that we did this show called Art Dash. It was just a one night event. So I should say it's more like a pop up.
Yeah,
And people had to apply for it. But then we put up 103 pieces of artwork and over 60 of them sold. Everything was $100. And
yeah.
the artist got all of the proceeds.
Wow.
And doing that show was so much work, but to see the artists, so we made the artists come to this event. And
Yeah,
so then the collectors were there and they literally are taking things off the wall and buying them. There's like a line of people buying things.
yeah,
It was so incredibly gratifying to watch the artists talking to people with like literally their piece in their hands
yeah,
sometimes. I really loved that. And we're doing that again this year.
yeah,
So I'm hoping that we'll have figured out something in terms of how to do it in the age of coronavirus.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
there's something about bringing people together with art, bringing the artists together, talking to them, supporting art and the artists that I absolutely love.
Yeah. What what drew you to social justice? Because that's a unique that's a unique um that's not something you see a lot of galleries, you know,
I
putting
think
out
that
there as their, you know, differentiator.
no, and it was never intended to be. To be honest with you, it wasn't
Yeah,
like I was like, and this is actually kind of more come about from what I realized my shows were doing, and I was like, I should really communicate on this because it's important to me, rather than this is part of like what differentiates me, if that makes sense.
yeah,
So it's more so like it's something that's always been part of who I am. And excuse me. And so, excuse me, I couldn't do anything but be part of it.
yeah. Um, how has have the recent events, George Floyd's death, and then all the protests have, the artists that you feature, have they been texting you and telling you, oh, I can't wait till you see this piece or things of that nature?
To be honest, not really.
Okay. All right. No, yeah,
Um, they, I don't have a lot of artists who are like working specifically on pieces related to that work
yeah,
on Black Lives Matter and things like that. They might. I'll be curious to see kind of what happens with the art dash, or things will kind of come out of it that way.
yeah,
What did happen, which I loved, was a lot of my artists were selling work on Instagram and were donating profits to the ACLU, the
yeah,
Massachusetts Fund, to Black Lives Matter, to causes that were meaningful to them.
yeah,
And I thought that was really fabulous.
yeah,
And I really loved how, and continue to love how, everyone is getting involved in their own unique way.
yeah. How has the COVID situation affected your gallery? Um,
I mean, we've had to be closed since about March. Hardly anyone has seen the show. That's behind me as right now. We've been open
yeah,
for about 2 weeks, and it's been tough. It's been tough. I mean, it's kind of like you're forced to pay rent, but you can't do anything. You're in a state of stasis.
Yeah. Um, and then I guess, so are people able to still view the things online, or are you?
Yeah, so that's like one of the places that the art world is going in general, is going online. So we have a
Yeah.
couple of exclusive online shows through artsy.net. And then all the work that we have has always been online as well. And you can buy it online, but then you can also just enjoy it online, to look through, and you can see what's coming up next, kind of click through future shows to at least get descriptions of them if the artwork isn't there. And but I really think nonetheless that it's important to be able to come into a physical space and see things if you want to.
Yeah.
So
Um,
I'm hoping that people will actually come back, and some people have. I mean, we had some people last weekend masked up, but still
yeah.
here.
Yeah. I guess, what's your vision for what you're doing? You know, 5 years from now, do you want to be doing anything different? Do you see yourself expanding into other areas, or?
Hmm. Well, I would say that, so I have a blog as well called thoughtsonart.com, and I really enjoy writing like art, critical art writing pieces, and I hope to continue to write about art. And I really hope that the gallery is still here. Most galleries don't make it 3 to 5 years, so we're coming up on 3 years. I know we're going to make it to 4. So the question is, will we continue from there? And my hope is yes. I think I see a path forward. I have also created a nonprofit that sits kind of with Beacon Gallery that's called Beacon Gallery Consulting, where I'm hoping to do more art consulting and also support artists in their careers. So kind of like supporting artists in their careers, and then also support people who are looking for art, and then do a few other exciting things that are kind of coming down the pipeline, projects that I will reveal in the future, we'll say.
Awesome. Christine, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I think you did a great job kind of covering it all. You
Okay.
revealed all my secrets.
Sounds good. So I just want to acknowledge you, Christine. I think that your journey is, awesome to learn from, and very inspirational. I think just, being so open to different cultures and living abroad, and broadening your horizons. Well, I didn't ask that. What's your favorite place of all time?
My favorite place of all time.
Yeah, that you travel to.
I don't know if I have an answer to that question.
Okay.
Usually people ask like my favorite place I lived, which was Hong
Okay.
Kong.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with a very, maybe a cliche answer, but I really love Saint-Tropez in the south of France.
Okay.
That's a place that we go, that my parents and I have traveled together to, and so I have like really great kind of family memories there. So it's not
Yeah.
just about the actual place, but I really enjoy being able to speak the language, so you can kind of connect with the individuals on a different level. And it's absolutely beautiful, and the food is great, and it's a really fun environment too.
Awesome. So yeah, as I was saying, I just think that it's been awesome to learn from your journey, and I know that a lot of people that are passionate about foreign languages and maybe living abroad and teaching abroad are going to find a lot of value from this. And I also want to commend you on starting your own gallery, and you know being so open to being associated with social justice. I think that's awesome. For people looking to support you, or maybe contact you, or visit the gallery, can you tell them about how to do those?
Sure. So the gallery can be reached at beacongallery.com. If you want to reach out to me, you can do so directly at Christine at beacongallery.com. That's Christine with a CH. And you can always visit us at 524B Harrison Ave in Boston. just get in touch first if it's not a Sunday.
Okay, perfect. Thank you
Thank you
so much
so
for
much.
being on, Christine.
This was great. Thank you. Have a good
Okay,
afternoon.
you